This is a new piece from Foreign Policy magazine. Let's take a look at the headline. It says, Germany is displacing Afghan refugees to make way for Ukrainians. So basically what they're doing here is social workers are turning up to where Afghan refugees are living in Germany and literally kicking them out so that Ukrainian refugees can move in. I'm not making this up. Look, they say Parwana Amiri was having breakfast with her husband and 2 small daughters in Berlin when an unexpected visitor, a social worker, stood outside bringing even more unexpected news. The family would have to clear out their home for newly arriving refugees from Ukraine. No questions, no negotiation, just out within 24 hours. Amiri, 33, a social activist and refugee from Afghanistan, arrived in Berlin in late January, fleeing the Taliban with the help of the German government after receiving threats for 2 years. He's one of hundreds of Afghan refugees across Germany who've been shunted aside to make way for newly arrived refugees from Ukraine. So they're doing this to hundreds of Afghans, and they're saying that they're keeping this under wraps. Of course, the German government would, they don't want you to know this, right? So the article says that the evictions purposely were not publicized. Some people had lived in their homes for years and were ripped out of their social structures, including children who were moved to locations far from their respective schools. And this is according to someone who's a board member on the Berlin Refugee Council. Now, he says few people's living conditions improved, but most were afraid to speak up, afraid it could impact their immigration status. Yeah, that's a real fear, because you're being welcomed into the country as a refugee, and you know that's already difficult enough. And if you start criticizing the government, even though the government are in the wrong in this case, yeah, they could boot you. They could revoke your residency, your refugee. I mean, I don't know if they can legally under international law revoke the refugee status. They would have to reevaluate everything. I don't know how that would work specifically, but they could certainly try to resettle you, and that's basically what they're doing, but internally, right? Resettlement is an entire different scheme, but just let me give you some more examples here. A 30-year-old Afghan man who didn't want to give out his name. He also arrived in Germany in January with his mother and 2 younger brothers, one of whom suffers from a heart condition. He said that after the family was evicted from the same complex where Amiri lived, he was separated from his brothers and mother and offered accommodation in a different part of the city. Do you understand? So they're not only kicking Afghan refugees out of their homes to make way for Ukrainians, they're even dividing them up. They're separating and breaking them up. I mean, this is crazy. Look what they said. They say, of course, it's not the Ukrainians' fault, but we have to reflect on our solidarity if it's only targeting certain people. The last months showed that different treatment of refugees is possible, and this needs to be systematically anchored in our society. This decision came from Berlin's Senate Department for Integration, Labor, and Social Services, arguing that it was, quote, based on operationally necessary and difficult considerations, and that there were no alternatives because Ukrainians, including many women and children, needed a roof over their heads and a bed. And the press secretary, Stefan Strauss, is saying, we regret that this caused additional hardships to the Afghan families and that the affected people had to move out of their familiar surroundings and now possibly have to keep up with their social connections with great difficulty. It's putting it mildly. He said Berlin had a total of 83 different accommodations for refugees, already housing 22,000 people, but that arriving Ukrainians needed to be consolidated to a few defined arrival centers to simplify processing, and that evicted Afghans were being given other permanent accommodation of equivalent quality, excluding shared bathrooms and kitchens. So Amiri and her family have been moved twice since their March eviction, and they now live in a former Berlin hotel. That's horrible, honestly. That's their 3rd home within a month. 3rd home within a month. I mean, you got to consider that a lot of refugees, whether in Germany or otherwise, they've already lived on the move, you know, going from one refugee center to another, going through processing, going through temporary accommodation. And then these guys, they got to Germany and they're thinking, thank God we're safe. We can rebuild our lives. And now they're just being plucked out of their homes multiple times. This is really psychologically distressing for anyone, refugee or otherwise, right? but especially you've been through war, you've fled your home country. This really sucks. This is really awful. And I think it's important to look at this because, well, I'll give you my opinion afterwards. Let me just give you some more background information, and try and give you the best bits from the article, the most important bits. So the new place doesn't come cheap. Amiri showed a letter detailing how much the German government is paying for the 2 small rooms and a shared kitchen. 37 euros a night per person, or about 4,500 euros a month. Wow. That is a lot. That is a lot. And it's not even clear how long they can stay. The family's first residence, which is a small but fully stocked container apartment, was theirs until they would be able to find their own apartment, which is, of course, tough in the overcrowded capital. That's true for anybody. And, you know, Germans are quite familiar with that. So Amiri says, we don't know where we're going to be sent next. My daughter already had secured a kindergarten spot. We were already slowly settling in until we were told to move. Since then, I've had no luck finding a nearby kindergarten with an opening. And while English-speaking social workers were available to assist with immigration paperwork and help enroll newly arrived refugees in German classes, there was no assistance provided at the new shelter. This family's first residence, this container apartment, was empty and deserted when Foreign Policy, that's this magazine, visited in early April, weeks after several families had been kicked out. Do you understand what they're saying? They're saying that these Afghan families were kicked out to make way for Ukrainian refugees, and there's no one in there. Right? Or did I misunderstand that? I think it's quite clear. So most people seeking safety in Germany enter the asylum system, which grants them temporary residency that is reevaluated every 6 months, depending on the situation in their home country. Extensions and eventually asylum are often denied. But most Afghans evacuated since last August skipped this process entirely, immediately receiving 3-year residency permits. Yeah, I think in that case, you know, it's pretty obvious the Taliban are not going anywhere. And you've had these terrible terrorist attacks, you know, just in the last 24 hours you had one, and a few days ago at a boys' school from, you know, again, it's really messed up. They spent 20 years bringing democracy to Afghanistan, and then look at it, it's upside down. So, I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it is horrible how they destroyed their country, and then they again, they're kind enough to accept them as refugees, but they're being shunned around like this. It's really distressing, to say the least. And you know, I'm not even concerned with this. This doesn't concern me. I don't know these people. My heart goes out to them because it's really, really distressing. So prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Germany was Europe's biggest host country for refugees. It's true, right? Opening its borders in 2015 to people mostly fleeing the war in Syria. More than 1.2 million refugees live in Germany, although Poland has welcomed some 2.8 million Ukrainians in the week since the February 24th invasion. That's true. So up until this point, right now we're 22nd of April, you've had just over 5 million Ukrainians that have left the country. Again, I'm counting Ukrainians that have fled Ukraine. You still have people inside Ukraine that have been displaced. But just in terms of who's left Ukraine, 5 million refugees, and you can see the bulk of them are in neighboring Poland, just next door. So again, here they talk about the Taliban coming in, and they say Germany flew roughly 5,000 people out, most of them Afghans. And you remember there was this whole scandal about all these NATO countries, Germany included, and the United States and the UK, they had employed all these translators to help them against the Taliban. And they're basically saying that, you know, thanks for helping us. We know the Taliban are after you because they consider you collaborators, but we're not going to give you refugee status, and we're going to keep you here for them to kill you off, basically. And that was scandalous, right? Because you had people that have literally worked for years with the Americans, with the American armed forces, with the British, with the Germans, and then they were basically saying, good luck, bye-bye. Not to all of them, but this has nothing to do with 2021. Even before that, you had people waiting years whose families were killed and hunted down by the Taliban because they had worked with the Americans. This is nothing. I'm not telling you anything new. This is common knowledge. And so they're saying since, again, Germany originally flew 5,000 people out. And then since then, Germany has further evacuated roughly 4,000 people, and we managed another 3,000. And this is from the non-profit Kabul Luftbrücke, which means air bridge. Okay, so that the total number of Afghans who've arrived in Germany after the Taliban's takeover is now 12,000. Yeah. Now, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Germany has registered 316,000 Ukrainians fleeing the war. So obviously, that's way more. And again, don't get me wrong. Germany is, as we've seen, has taken many refugees in. But you can see how they've taken many more Ukrainians, and that's true of not just Germany, but all of the Western countries. They're taking in way more Ukrainians. So I think that's about it. And just to give you my thoughts, this is already way better than what the UK is doing. The UK now wants to send refugees to Rwanda. And I've talked about this on the channel. I've made a video about this very in-depth and detailed, and I'm going to talk about it again in a second. But this is still not okay. I think this is really messed up because, like I said, refugees, they've been through a lot. They've already been moved around, gone through several countries, gone through processing, gone through temporary accommodation, gone through processing centers. There's people fleeing war. You know, these are people that the German government has looked at their cases and certified that they are genuine refugees. They have a genuine fear for their life for whatever reason, if it's political or otherwise, or there's instability in the country, and they need to be recognized as refugees and taken in because Germany is a country that's a signatory to the Refugee Convention and so on. And the fact that they're being moved around like that, I think this is unfair. I think this is especially egregious when they're telling them, sorry, you have to leave because Ukrainians are coming in, and then the accommodation is empty. What? Where are the Ukrainians? Obviously, there are more Ukrainians, but I think it just shows you how they're treating Ukrainian refugees as superior to Afghan refugees or Syrian refugees. Again, man, the UN Refugee Convention doesn't say Ukrainian refugees or European refugees are worth more than refugees from the Middle East. If you are a refugee, you're a refugee. End of story. If you're a human being, you're a human being. You're equal. End of story. There is no discrimination in the convention based on your skin color or your country of origin or how you got to the place where you're seeking asylum. This is irrelevant. This is irrelevant. But nevertheless, you're seeing European countries, NATO countries, giving preferential treatment to Ukrainian refugees because they're Europeans. And we have several people on television who said the quiet part out loud, right? This started with this scandalous presenter on NBC News, and then we've had several reporters since then basically saying that, yeah, of course we should take in Ukrainian refugees because they're white and civilized. Now, hold on a second. Yes, you should take in the Ukrainian refugees because they're refugees, not just because they're white and European and civilized. What does that mean? The other refugees are not civilized? This is so disgusting and Orientalist, right? It's really quite xenophobic and racist. That's what it is. It's what it is. There's no excuse for that. You can't weasel your way out of this one. This is just straight up racism, right? And being civilized and European and white has nothing to do with whether you are a genuine refugee or not. Okay, that's irrelevant. But nevertheless, we're seeing that. And I mean, what the UK is doing, that's a whole other story. That's even more despicable. And I'll get to that. But France, let me give you the example of France and the United States, because up until a few months ago, they were saying, oh no, we can't take in all these migrants from south of the border in the US. Oh, we can't take all of these migrants from Africa and the Middle East. Do you see how they call them migrants? Like as if they just decided to, come for no reason. It's not like there's poverty, there's war, their countries have been colonized and plundered for centuries. In any case, they said, we don't have any space. Sorry, we can't take you in. We don't have the resources. And then all of a sudden, we're announcing 100,000 places for refugees from Ukraine. Well, what? Great. I'm happy that you're welcoming them in. What about those? What about the people that are fleeing the wars you started in the Middle East and Africa? You got any space for them? Oh, I see how it is. So do you see how this is a lie when the United States and the French, they say that they don't have any places. They, like that, in the blink of an eye, they just came up with them out of thin air. You cannot look at that and tell me that there isn't bias at play here. I'm not making these statements up. They're public. You can look them up. I've shown them to you, right? So, tu vois quand tu veux. You see when you want to? Everything is possible. Everything is possible. And I think we're seeing in multiple dimensions, not just in discourse, but even legally speaking, how European countries, Western countries, are giving preferential treatment to Ukrainians than to other countries. And you know, the sick irony here is that the refugees that are coming from Afghanistan, who created them? Who created those refugees? Who created the refugees in Syria, in Iraq? Who created the refugees in Libya? They bombed themselves, or what? Or did NATO bomb them and sanction them? It's NATO. And then these same countries, they turn around and say, "Oh, sorry, we can't let you in." Oh, so you got money and resources for bombs, but not for the refugees that you created. That's very fucking funny. That's very, very smart. They really think we're stupid. And then the UK is doing something disgusting. They're saying that if you come to the UK and you are recognized as a refugee, the British government is going to look at your case and say, yes, you are a 100% genuine refugee. We're giving you refugee status. They're going to send you to Rwanda. So again, this is not asylum seekers or migrants, economic migrants, refugees. They're going to send you to Rwanda. So the UK is not only being hypocritical, is especially disgusting because the Refugee Convention was written by the United Kingdom. They wrote the fucking thing and signed it in 1951. Again, but many countries have signed it, but the UK helped author it. And now it wants to send refugees to Rwanda. It's a money-making scheme. I'm telling you this because I've covered the offshore detention centers in Australia, and I interviewed some of the refugees who were there. They kept them on islands in Nauru and Papua New Guinea for years. You had a guy who came there when he was 15, 9 years in detention, being processed. He's not being processed. It takes, you can process an individual very quickly. They're keeping these people there because they were making literally millions per person in detention. So you have private corporations, contractors that get paid so much money from the government to keep refugees in detention. And they just, you know, they're just wasting time and making these people suffer psychologically just so they can make money. And in the end, they're all approved as refugees because they are legitimate refugees. And then they were given, thankfully, just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, these guys that have been in detention for literally 5 years, 7 years, 9 years were given, were set free, I should say, where they were set free. So what the UK is doing is a disgusting money-making scheme. It's in violation of the Refugee Convention. It's in violation of, you know, every international agreement the UK has signed in terms of human rights and the rights of refugees. And you need to be aware of what it is. You have to be aware of what it is. So just going back to what's happening in Germany, you know, how unsurprising. How unsurprising. By all means, you should take in Ukrainians, but don't crap on other people who are just as legitimate.